Dorsland,
Here.
Woken, Carter,
Here.
Coert, Esri,
Here.
Furtado, Goss,
Here.
Harper, Humphrey, King,
Here.
Lockshin,
Here.
McGuire, Michaels,
Here.
Passalacqua,
Here.
Patterson.
Here.
Okay, thank you. There is a quorum. Moving on now to the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Goss? Ms. Straub? Okay, any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're down to item 4, budget presentations. Tonight is a beginning of an interactive process with the board. We started this in June and July with the executive starting to have meetings with the department heads, met with all of the department heads. We're bringing now the first draft budget to you to look at, to see what that has resulted in. We'll have the meeting tonight and tomorrow night. It is a long meeting and important, I think, for us to go through some detail with this budget so that everybody understands. Some of you are new as well. What we'd like to do is do each department at a time, and then if there are questions, those officials are here to answer questions. We'd like to focus on the budget only, not on operations, because we just have a limited amount of time to get through this meeting. September the 23rd, I present the county budget to the board, and then the 30th is a special finance committee of the whole, where the finance committee then gets together, all of you together as a committee, to talk about the budget, any changes that you might like to make, things that you'd like to see in it. And I know this year ARP is going to be a big discussion as well. October the 12th, the tentative budget is placed with the finance committee for final recommendations on to the board. And then October the 21st, the county board receives and places on file the tentative budget. There is not a truth in taxation hearing this year that's going to be required, so we don't need to do that piece. And then November 9th, the Finance Committee forwards the final budget to the County Board, and November 18th is the board approval. Just so that you know, the board is required to approve a final budget by the end of November, so that is the deadline we worked backwards from. And so if we need to have any special meetings in the interim, we probably need to schedule them ahead of that. So that's the process, and we're now tonight in the budget, the legislative budget hearings, which is the presentation from the executive to the county board. So Tammy is going to do a series of slides. You have a copy on your desk of the slides. So we've kind of turned your desks all around because I thought it'd be easier for you guys to look at the big slides. However, I would like to just say if there are questions, the presenters will be sitting in the back, so you might need to move your microphone so that you can still be heard, because turning around you won't be able to hear the mics. Okay, are we ready to start? Okay, go Tammy.
Good evening. Before we start, I just want to point out a couple of things regarding the slides tonight. When you're looking at the fiscal year 21 and 22 revenues and expenditures that are in the upper right-hand corner, those numbers are the fiscal year 2021 budget, original budget, and the fiscal year 22 proposed budget at this point. So it's a budget to budget comparison. Also, the fiscal year 2020 fund balances are unaudited at this point. There is a memo from the auditor's office in your binder. So if those numbers are corrected through the audit process, they will carry through to fiscal year 21 and 22 fund balances. We're going to start tonight with the Regional Office of Education, and the Regional Superintendent Gary Lewis is here. I'm going to ask the elected officials and department heads to stand, just so you can put a face with a name if you haven't seen them yet. So Gary is here tonight from the Regional Office of Education. This year's budget expenditure is $234,222. The basis for that is the Illinois state statute requirement that the county's EAV in the taxable region is the percentage that is used. And in Champaign County's case, we represent 94% of the assessed valuation of the region. So our $234,000 commitment is based on that 94% EAV against the expenditures of the office. The ROE was awarded a new grant this year from the Illinois State Board of Education. It is a 5-year grant to help retain and recruit special education teachers. And one thing I want to point out, you'll hear probably throughout tonight and tomorrow night, is a reference to the level the playing field legislation. And just to give a recap of that, that was the legislation that became effective January 1st of this year that actually imposes state and local sales taxes at the point of delivery. So that will have a positive impact on the county sales tax for school facilities, which the Regional Office of Education is responsible for distributing to school districts throughout Champaign County. And so the positive impact of that legislation will allow for more funding for Champaign schools. And Mr. Lewis provided a report to me that I pulled some numbers from today. The April through July distributions reflected a 19% increase over that same year ago period last year. And for the July 2021 distribution, for the first time ever, that amount exceeded $2 million. I will briefly pause after I present each slide in the event there are questions, and then I will just move on.
So if there's no questions, usually the officials leave after they're part of the presentation. So if there's any questions about regional office, this would be the time to ask Gary now so he can leave. Okay, seeing none. Thanks for coming, Gary.
Extension education is our next budget, and the director, Ginger Bose, is here. Ginger, please stand. Ginger has indicated that the state funding for extension education has improved slightly. Champaign County property taxes make up about 32.6% of the total revenues for the extension education office. And the total revenues, I believe, in this fiscal year were about $1.3.5 million. The number of volunteer hours, which are in-kind hours, equates to thousands of dollars that are contributed in our community. Extension focuses on the underserved to improve healthy food access, family relationships, and financial wellness, and also targets high-risk families and seniors where they live, work, and play. And a couple of examples of some of the programs provided by Extension Education are the Expanded Food Nutrition Program, SNAP education programs, and also Consumer Economics Educator programs, which teach personal finance skills. And I will point out that this is a direct levy to the taxpayers for this service. The county levies on behalf of Extension Education. Our next budget is the Veterans Assistance Commission, and Superintendent Brad Gould is here tonight. December of this year will mark the 10th year since the VAC program was established. Per Brad, we have the 13th largest veteran population in the area, and an estimated 457 veterans will receive financial assistance from the VAC in this fiscal year. Also, year to date, I know the slide says we've received about $6,300 in donations, but I talked to Brad this morning, and I think we're closer to about $6,800 in donations that have been received year to date. And the county receives those dollars and donations and then turns around and uses them to directly benefit veterans with additional assistance. So you will be seeing a budget amendment coming later in the year from Brad to be able to receive these donations and request an additional expenditure to distribute them. The Board of Review is our next budget, and our Board of Review member, John Burgee, is here tonight. And this, as you know, is a new board, and we did not have any performance indicators at the time that I put your budget binders together, but Mr. Burgee has since provided me with the performance indicator numbers, so you will see those numbers updated when we get the budget ready for placing on file. In fiscal year 22, this budget is 96% of personnel costs. And as I mentioned, there are 3 board members on this board, and there are nominal non-personnel costs for office supplies and some travel and training. The Supervisor of Assessments budget is next. And, Paula is here. Paula Bates is here, our Supervisor of Assessments. 50% of the Supervisor of Assessments salary is reimbursed from the state, and there is an increase in 2022 in publication costs for the quadrennial census. Paula estimates that we will be publishing a total of about 55 properties. New construction in fiscal year 2021 is at $98 million. And per Paula, as of July 6th, the staff has processed 2,667 property transfers, which is an increase of 27% from the previous year. So we know that the real estate market is still very active. Auditor George Donos is here tonight to represent his department. Another budget with a large percentage of salary and wage costs, constituting 96% of this budget. The largest non-personnel expenses are for conferences and training. And both the auditor and the chief deputy auditor have required CPE hours in order to maintain their CPA designations. After not having attended the GFOA conference for a few years, both the auditor and chief deputy auditor intend to resume that training and will be attending the annual national conference. CJ was unable to be with us here tonight. I know Chief Deputy Deshaun Williams is here. I think most of you probably already know him. In fiscal year 2020 through fiscal year 22, some of the expenditures that were normally expensed in the tax cycle were paid from the tax sale automation fund. However, if you recall, that fund was depleted a couple of years ago, and so we had to begin transferring those costs over to the treasurer's operating budget. And we will be doing that again in fiscal year 22 with the hopes of restoring Fund 619 to a healthier fund balance. Equipment that was historically purchased from the tax sale automation fund has been budgeted in the capital asset replacement fund. So I think we've got a few computers scheduled for replacement next year and an envelope sealer and another piece of equipment that the office indicated that it needs. However, our hope is that after next year, that fund will be in a healthier position to be able to take on some of those costs again, beginning in fiscal year 2023. And that is also the year that the remainder of the computers in that office are scheduled to be replaced. So we will have to just continue to gauge the revenues in that fund and fund balance to determine how much and when we would be able to shift some of those costs back to that fund. Treasurer Johnson requested an increase, or actually the addition of a travel appropriation to the fiscal year 2022 budget to allow staff and herself and the chief deputy to be able to attend some more professional conferences.
Stephanie, did you have a question?
I did. I could wait till, when you're done with the treasurer's presentation, I have a question.
I'm done with the operating budget. Do you want me to go on with the other budgets, or was it related to this particular one?
No, it's related to the operating budget. When we passed the, earlier this year, the resolution to increase the deputy treasurer's salary, we did so with the intention, sort of the compromise in the meeting was that we would do part of the request at that time, and then we would revisit it in the budget process. And so my question, and I see that it's referenced in a memo at the front of the binder, but my question is there capacity within this budget in order to accommodate that request?
Not with the current personnel appropriation that's reflected in this budget.
Right. As I've stated before to the executive, if we expect that that will be remedied before we see the final budget.
Okay, working cash fund is the second of 4 budgets under the treasurer's purview. And this fund is established by statute and allows for the real estate tax-supported funds to borrow if necessary. This fund hasn't not been used in several years. It's not been used since I've been here, and I think even several years before that. The revenue from this fund is from investment interest, and at the end of the year, that interest income is transferred to the general fund. The tax sale automation fund is also somewhat of a pass-through fund. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got these mixed up. Hold on. I apologize. This is a Fund 619 that I was referring to earlier, where we are shifting some of the costs that have historically been paid from this fund over to the general fund to allow for this fund balance to be healthier. At the end of fiscal year 2022, it is projected the fund balance will be just under $24,000. The main source of revenue for this fund is a $10 fee for every tax sale item. And some of the expenses that this fund is paying for are the real estate tax billing processes and lockbox collection expenses. And again, I mentioned that computer replacement is scheduled for fiscal year 2023. The property tax interest fee fund is another somewhat of a pass-through fund for a revenue source to the general fund. And this is an income based on $60 per tax sale property, and then money accumulating over $100,000 is transferred to the general fund at the end of the fiscal year. For the county clerk's budgets, we have Chief Deputy Angie here to answer questions if there are any. There are 2 elections in 2022, and per the office, they are planning for continued voter trends utilizing early voting and vote by mail. In 2022, this office is planning a reorganization, taking 2 senior election specialist position and 1 deputy clerk position, and changing those positions over to election specialist positions as they deem that to be the need of the office. And as you know, there was a referendum passed that combined the offices of the county clerk and the recorder, and so the clerk's office is already working with the recorder's office to make this transition be as smooth as possible. COVID-19 impacted the revenues for the clerk's office in fiscal year 20 and is expected to extend into fiscal year 2021. However, the office was able to provide most of the services throughout the pandemic online, and they're looking in fiscal year 22 at some digitization projects that will also generate additional revenue streams for both the clerk and the recorder's office. One of the things that I want to point out that is a concern of mine, and I think the offices as well, is the cost of having to run a full-scale election where we have to provide locations for people to vote in person, and also the cost of the vote by mail and early voting options. Those are just, it's very expensive to be providing all of those services. So I know that this office, this county clerk's office, is working closely with the state legislature to try to come to some kind of arrangement that would help to mitigate that cost, but still provide fair and equitable voting opportunities throughout Champaign County. And one of the things that is proposed is vote centers, and I believe that Champaign County is potentially going to be a pilot. Is that correct, Angie? A pilot for vote centers.
Go ahead, Jim.
Actually, I'd like ask some questions about those issues. First, line 64, election judges and workers, the significant increase in those. I like workers defined. I understand paying for election judges. I'm not sure about the county providing what other workers.
Angie, do you want to come up?
That's, you can sit at that table, Angie, right there. There'll be a mic.
I see just stated the cost of election judges and workers. We have election judges and poll watchers, but we have an increase from 167,000 to 212,000. What responsibilities do these workers have? Who are they, and what are they accomplishing?
Okay.
Can I
Angie,
ask,
is
where-
that just
where-
a
where are we
naming
looking?
mechanism?
It's the election judges that work, how we define it and how the county's processing for the HR and payroll is election judges that actually work election day, or election judges, workers that are under the $600 threshold.
Well, it's the workers I'm most interested in. Obviously, we need to have election judges, but what are these workers doing, and why aren't they in the general employment budget of the county?
Because there are different descriptions within the elections department. So a good example is we have people that go out. We have a team that deliver the equipment that doesn't get handled by the township supervisors. So those would also be considered workers, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question about the workers. The consolidated polling places, what'd you call it? I'm sorry, the voting centers, which I'm not sure there's been a discussion by the county or the voters about whether we want to have election centers in the county, because they seem to be located mostly in urban areas. We've had reports that the county clerk is wanting to close polling places in rural areas. Obviously, that creates an issue for those voters who want to vote on election day. But if there were voting centers and election equipment had to be delivered, and there's fewer voting locations, wouldn't it cost less to deliver the equipment
Right. Well,
rather than more?
for fiscal year 2022, we're not there yet. So the legislation hasn't passed. We know that it's potentially coming. We don't know the exact timeline on it. And I just want to say one thing to your point. That is your perception about vote centers and how they'll roll out. The clerk is very committed to access to voting for all. It's one of the reasons why we purchased additional drop boxes so that they can be implemented in Rantoul, St. Joe, Tolono. So that is not accurate depiction of what you're saying.
I think it is. Obviously, I've heard from
I don't.
road commissioners concerning the polling places being closed already and in preparation for this. All the vote boxes were placed in urban areas the last time.
We
There
had
was
mobile
one in the
voting.
south.
We had mobile
Can I finish
voting
my
drop
discussion?
boxes. So what you're saying is not accurate. We're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves. The legislation isn't in place for vote centers. Obviously, when that time comes to pass, we will be before the board in a very transparent and thorough manner.
I don't change my discussion.
Okay, that's cool.
I mean,
Go
I've
ahead.
got.
Do you have a
if there-
budget
there's-
question, Jim, related
It
to?
is a budget question because of the fact of the cost and difference in the additional cost, including the increase in cost, election services from 329,000 to 426,000. So that is actually a significant increase. Why we're trying to push vote by mail when we won't have, hopefully, COVID in 2022, that we should need to have that kind of voting. So I see both of those lines in the discussion. Maybe it's premature because, as you said, it hasn't happened yet, but obviously the clerk is pushing to have that accomplished by the election. So.
Right, but
I
where we're
wouldn't
at
see-
right now in this moment in time and planning for this budget, we needed to prepare for a full election for both elections.
Mr.
in
Summers?
2022.
Not a question, just a comment. I don't believe vote centers really have a partisan standing. I remember talking with former Clerk Holton, who was a proponent of vote centers a number of years ago. So this is not something that is brand new.
Ms. Michaels?
That's the fuzzy one. Going back to that line item there, what I'm seeing is a little over a 30% increase from the 21 budget, not what was actual. I understand actual because we had a unique year anyway for different things. And I'm wondering, I thought that the vote centers or whatever would maybe make that a little more cost effective for people. So I was, a 30% plus increase on that line was just a little bit much. And you can get back to me later and tell me
No,
what
for-
the thought is on that.
I will. I can give you more detail, but just for clarity's sake, which line item, the election judges and workers?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
64. Thanks.
Mr. Patterson?
When it comes to the cost differences between years, is it accurate to say that a general primary and a general election are more expensive than having a consolidated
Yeah,
general?
for sure, for sure.
Ms. Furtado?
Just a couple of questions. One, for a point of clarity, I think that last line that Mr. McGuire spoke to, the 426, 429, is actually the total of that
Yeah.
entire services column. So it's not one specific cost. There's several costs that are rolled up into it. The second thing is, I would anticipate that if we do go to the vote center model, and I guess this is more a question for Tammy, if there are cost savings in personnel, we would move that back to the fund balance, just like we did in 2020. I think the clerk's office moved a pretty sizable amount of their personnel budget back to the fund balance, in part because of underspending, but also because of grants that was received. Is that inaccurate? I forget how much they moved back.
There have been significant grant funding. There is a separate fund where a lot of that grant funding is running through. But yes, that helped mitigate the impact to the general fund. And one thing that I will say is that, you can't see in this snapshot of the finances the 2018 election. And I think, Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the election judges and workers were at $210,000 back in 2018.
Yeah,
Right.
they were.
I think that the 2020, I could be wrong, but part of the reason that drove that down was because we had, because of COVID, what was it, 150 poll workers who couldn't fulfill their duties due to health concerns.
Correct.
So when they didn't fulfill their duties, we didn't have to pay them. So the actual in 2020, because I was here on the board when we passed that budget, is actually quite a bit lower. And I don't think the 212 is that far off from what was actually budgeted in 2020 if we had ran a full landscape of an election.
Yeah.
I do have one additional question. The other significant driver in cost is the equipment maintenance. And I apologize if I missed that and you all spoke on it, but can you speak to that? Because that is the other significant increase from 2020 to 2021 to 2022.
Right, so with the addition of the vote by mail equipment that was purchased under the CARES Act, we budgeted it in for the maintenance for those machines. And I just want to say that, like, any of the things that if there is a surplus at the end, we anticipate giving that back to the general, as we have done in every single budget year since we have taken office.
It is hard to say between the years because there are 2 elections in this year and there was 1 election the previous year, and they're different.
Right.
So the budgets are different from year to year. I would also just like to mention, I know you're looking at line items, which is great, but sometimes things get moved from one budget to another, personnel or equipment or computers, things like that. And so sometimes the numbers look off for that reason as well. But good questions.
Okay, we'll move on to the county clerk surcharge fund, and this is just simply a pass-through fund for the receipt and distribution of marriage and death certificates to the state. And this is the County Clerk Election Assistance and Accessibility Grant Fund. This fund has been the recipient of significant revenue funding for the vote by mail historically. And in 2022, the State Board of Election grant funding is going to be back on a more regular timeline. I know that if you look in the budget itself, you will see that there's a negative fund balance projected for fiscal year 2020. We expect that to be rectified in fiscal year 2021. And while the grant funding levels haven't been announced yet, the office anticipates $215,000 in grant funding that they will use to offset election security and voter registration costs. In fiscal year 2021, they were issued a $15,000 ADA grant to help make polling places more accessible. For the County Clerk's Automation Fund, the future goal of this fund is to let it build up the balance a little bit for future technology and capital purchases. In the meantime, this fund has been used to pay for some of the software and some of the equipment for the office. For the recorder's budget, the current recorder, Mike Ingram, is here. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a very strong real estate market in fiscal year 2021, and that has generated some significant revenues for the county in the form of document stamp revenues and also rental housing remittance revenues. For document stamps, 2/3 of those revenues that are received are distributed to the state, and for rental housing remittance, 90% of those revenues are passed through to the state. So the budget for fiscal year 2021, because of the strong real estate market, is not significant enough to be able to receive and then distribute those revenues back to the state. So you will be seeing a budget amendment coming towards the end of the year that will receive both additional revenue and expenditure. And in fiscal year 22, the biggest change for this department is the elimination of the recorder's salary. And that was an opportune time for the county to move the 2 FTEs that are currently in the Recorder's Automation Fund back to the general fund. And I believe that those positions were moved, it was either 2015 or 2016, when there were budget cuts where those 2 FTEs were moved out of the general fund into that special revenue fund. And so this is an opportune time to get those positions back into the general fund when they are, in effect, actually performing general fund duties. And then that will allow, moving to the next budget, the automation fund to better focus on statutory goals such as indexing and digitizing. And the office also has been working to fix some of the gaps in a digital fee structure that will also generate more funding for the county.
Ms. Michaels, you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I haven't heard anything, but certainly those two departments, and as we go down the line, the circuit clerk's department, is everybody considering that their fees would be staying the same with these budgets?
I'm sorry, their fees?
Fees, they're not looking at any fee increases in this budget.
For the recorder's office?
Recorder, clerk, since they're kind of comboed together.
For the recorder's office, Mr. Ingram can speak better to this, but I know that he's been working on implementation of, I don't know how to say it other than equitable fee structure for for-profit groups that are actually taking advantage of county services. Mike?
Yeah, so we won't be, we haven't looked at changing anything that would be your average day-to-day, county constituent coming in to, to file a deed or anything like that. We haven't looked at any sort of changes in that regard. One thing that kind of the fixing the gap line is about, the way that we have it set up with the programs that we use through our vendor. Laredo is the most common one, and the constituency that uses that, it's the title companies and things like that. They pay per minute to be on those, or they buy a 400 minute or whatever package. With that particular application, most counties, all but about 3 left in the state, they also have a printing fee per that agreement. That would be, so even if they remote printed something to PDF or on their own printer, there would be some sort of fee. We are one of the few counties left that doesn't do that. And the problem that we have found is that there are a couple of national companies that take advantage of that. They're printing 20, 40,000 pages per month, which is them just harvesting every bit of our data for whatever reason they're going to be doing that. So we're trying to figure out a way to like, as Tammy said, to equitably kind of stop that, but not really impact our local folks by making them pay for every single print. So no other counties in Illinois do it, but I worked with our vendor to try to figure out a way to mirror what they do in a couple of other states, which is set basically a just like they have minutes per month. They also have maybe a number of prints, like say 3,000. This way, they continue to do what they're doing. We don't really impact the local folks at all, but we make sure that we turn off the faucet, which is just open for these national companies that are just harvesting every bit of our data. So that's kind of, the other recorders across the county that I've talked to who have implemented these printing fees, even just from the base, from zero, for the first print, are very happy with the money that they're generating, of course. Which I think is nice for them. I don't really want to make that sort of impact locally, and really gouge is the wrong word, but I don't want to hit them hard that way. But assuming that these bigger companies continue to do this, they're all willing to pay this to other counties, and if we can use that to continue to digitize. I almost brought down one of the books that's falling apart that I've been taping back together in my office so that everybody could see what they look like, because you're talking about documents from the 1800s. We really, really need to work hard to get those digitized as soon as possible. So that's part of what I want to make sure we do with the salary not being paid to me anymore.
And just to add to that, Ms. Michaels, a few years ago, the county board passed a resolution that established the other fees that are in the recorder's office, and that was based on legislation that required us to set the fees that had to be paid in advance so that people knew exactly what those fees were going to be when they came in, regardless of the number of pages that they would be filing.
Thank you. So looking at the personnel line and the changes, regular full-time employees goes from $81,000 to $155,000. That's a pretty significant increase. What is that?
I believe, again, that's the positions that we were discussing moving from.
Yes, the $81,882 was a fiscal year 2020 actual. The budget for fiscal year 2021 was actually closer to $84,000. So in comparing the last year, I just want to make sure we're looking at the most recent information. But yes, in fiscal year 22, this $155,600 would include the increase for the one non-bargaining employee that's in the office, and the movement of the 2 FTEs from the automation fund back to the general fund.
Jim, if you look at page 43, line 5113, you could see that $62,000 is reduced down to 0. So it's jumping from the automation budget over. So you got to kind of look at both at the same time.
So 69,000 is 3 employees being added? I don't understand. I
2.
understand what
2.
you're saying, that they're being moved back from the general fund. So that $81,000 was that cost of being moved from the general fund? When they were in the general fund, they were 81,000, and now they're 155,000?
There are already 2 employees in this line.
Correct. So
Yeah.
currently there is the elected official and 2 full-time employees. We're striking the elected official out and moving the 2 that had been moved to the automation fund, as Tammy explained earlier. They don't really belong there. They were moved there previously. So we're moving them back to the general fund so that they are more appropriately placed, since the automation fund is technically supposed to go towards digitalization. So even though we are moving the money that we would be paying them from the automation fund to the general fund, the money that's getting paid to those 2 employees, which is 2 full-times, is still less than what we're taking away by eliminating my position. So it's less than a wash, but that's the increase that you're seeing there, is that instead of that budget having just the 2 FTEs, it will now have 4.
So the fiscal year 2021 budget for personnel was $182,000. The fiscal year 22 budget for personnel will be $155,600.
So
Okay.
it dropped
So
my
the
salary,
real
but we also
savings is
added.
$27,000. By consolidating, the real savings is $27,000.
No, it's the whole salary. We're just trying to offset. We're moving 2 positions into there.
The positions are coming from the automation fund, which is in the next line, the next slide you have. There are 2 positions currently in the automation fund now that will be moved over to this budget. And then the automation fund will then, as it builds up again, will be used for automation purposes.
So
Go ahead, Stephanie.
So this is also just for folks that are new to the board. Because of sort of the burden that we've had on the general fund, we've had staff in the automation fund in various departments throughout the years, and that's just not an ideal situation. I know that when our former circuit clerk, I mean, every time she came, she always asked to get people moved off of the automation fund. And so because of the fact that the burden of the general fund is being reduced, that gives us an opportunity in this instance to move people out of the automation fund, so the automation fund can then do what it was supposed to do from its conception. And so this is something, I believe that there's also been some movement, maybe from last year's budget in the circuit clerk's office, moving people off of the automation fund. But this is like a long-term sort of fiscal goal of the county, is to try whenever possible to move these people that we've been carrying on the automation fund just because we didn't really have any other options, right?
So that's been going on for, I think, started maybe in 2008.
Right.
Because the budget needed to be cut each year for a while.
Right.
And so in order to try to maintain the number of staff needed to do the work, the people that were at all involved with any kind of computer, digital kinds of things were moved into the automation funds, because those funds are generated from fees, so they were continuing to have revenue. And so that's how we kept staff. But now it's time to move them back into the general fund.
So just in general, we've been pretty robust in our definition of what is allowed on the automation fund in order to make our budget work. I do actually have one question, and this is maybe a small question. The budgeting of the revenue from the stamps and then the payout of the stamps, for the last 2 years, it's been higher than what we're budgeting. But we're still just budgeting, like the turnaround, purchase of the stamps at $1 million. Is that just because we're not sure that volatility will continue? I mean, would there be any, this is a small thing because we could just do what we did this year and reappropriate it. but, maybe trying to save.
Actually, Mr. Ingram and I looked at this, and we did a historical analysis,
Okay.
and the 5-year average is $1.5 million.
Okay.
So I know this year and last year, there was a strong real estate market,
Right.
driven by, a lot of refinancing and just sales. But the 1.5 seems like a more realistic
Okay.
number for us to use.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you. Moving on to the Juvenile Detention Center. Mike is here. The director, Mike Williams, is here tonight, and I'll go ahead and go through his budgets. If you have any questions, you can ask him. Salary reimbursement allocation for the state's fiscal year 22 was recently received, and we're happy to report that it includes full funding for the officers' salaries, and that includes also cost of living increases. So the department has 46 full reimbursement for grants and aid positions, and 14 subsidy positions, which we receive $1,000 a month for. And one of the things that is a little bit frustrating with this reimbursement is that the timing of the reimbursement is very inconsistent, and so that messes with our budget. If we receive too many months in one budget year or too few months in one budget year, it really skews the budget numbers. In this budget for fiscal year 21, there was a 2.8% increase in medical services, and we are projecting a 5% increase in medical services for fiscal year 2022. The department has asked for an appropriation increase of $2,000 to be able to provide pre-employment physical examinations for applicants, and that's a $2,000 cost. This department has really struggled with turnover, and that has resulted in increased overtime costs, and those costs are not reimbursed by the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts. For court services, again, salary reimbursement from the state is considered full funding, and 98% of the court services budget is attributed to personnel costs. Fund 618 has two departments, the first being probation services, and the chief judge has to authorize expenditures from this fund after the annual probation plan has been approved by AOIC. This fund has historically been used to offset the impact to the general fund when there are cuts to salary reimbursement. And I looked quickly today, in 2016 to 2019, the Probation Services Fund contributed over $700,000 to the general fund to mitigate the shortfall in that AOIC reimbursement. Fortunately for us, the last couple of years we have received full funding, and again, we're expecting that in fiscal year 2022. The Probation Services Fund is a contributor to the Champaign County Drug Court, including support groups within the drug court. The Court Services Operation Fee Fund, again, the expenditures from this fund have to be authorized by the Chief Judge, and there were some minor costs paid from this fund this fiscal year to complete the replacement of the video surveillance and security system at the Juvenile Detention Center, and in fiscal year 2020, this fund was a significant contributor to helping to get that system installed. Are there any questions of Mr. Williams? Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving to the coroner's budget, Coroner Dwayne Northrup is here tonight. The coroner's office has, Dwayne, you want to stand? I think everyone knows what you look like. The coroner's office has experienced significant turnover over the last few years, and staff burnout is one of the major drivers of this. You heard at the meeting last week the coroner's request and approved to add positions to this department. In fiscal year 22, those additional positions are funded. And in addition, there are some increased funding for operational supplies, medical, dental, mental health, and also indigent burial cost. There has been a significant rise in the number of unclaimed descendants over the past year, and I know that Mr. Northrup has done his best to try to keep that line as low as possible for the county, but it has gotten to the point where we're going to have to increase that appropriation because the number of individuals needing that assistance has increased. For the Coroner Statutory Fee Fund, this was a recently created fund based on analysis of the legislation that required this revenue to be kept separate from the general fund. And we are paying from this fund things such as electronic and forensic identification equipment and other supplies and operating expenses of the coroner's office that are allowed by statute. The cost of goods and services have increased significantly since COVID-19. And ultimately, this fund will be basically the capital fund for the coroner. We still have a capital fund in our capital asset replacement fund for the coroner, but we're spending down the reserve revenue in that fund and anticipate that this statutory fee fund will take over those costs.
You have a question, Kyle?
Yeah, so the increase in the indigent burial, looks like it was budgeted 2,000, but the actual was 5,600. How many is that? Like, because, what's the difference?
Well, the actual cost right now. Good? There you go. Yeah. We get the same cost technically that other funeral homes get from cremation services. Right now it's running between $400 and $500 per case. So it doesn't go very far. Now there's certain things in the statute we're not required, like if a case is a case that the coroner actively investigates and signs a death certificate, if there's no family to claim the decedent or come forward, or they have no funds, then the coroner has to step in and assist. If it's not a case that falls under the coroner's jurisdiction, then there's not that requirement. So there's other facilities that actually do handle some cases, but we're seeing a large number of cases that are falling under our jurisdiction, and it just seems to keep increasing every year. So it's, like I said, about $500 on average per case for a cremation. Most of them are cremated.
Thank you.
Mr. Storr?
To Mr. Patterson's point about how many, could you give us a number or a percentage of increase in the indigent?
I don't have a specific number increase. I can tell you I've probably got 4 sitting in the morgue right now that we haven't handled yet. And at any given time, I've got 4 as soon as we handle 1 or 2, because there's a timeline it takes us. I also have to do due diligence to find family members. If I find any family members, that could be distant cousin or somebody. It can take us 2 or 3 months to track down a family member because of the transient nature of the population. Plus, we have a trauma center that brings people in from all over the state as well. And then when they die here, and then if there's no family to claim them, which is one of the things we're seeing as well. So I don't have a percentage for you. I can go back and calculate it. I can tell you I have a full page checklist that I go down, because if the person's a veteran, let's say unclaimed, I can work with the VA sometimes and they will claim the person and bury them in a VA cemetery. If they were a nursing home patient and they have a fund in the nursing home, under the statute, I can seize those assets to help offset our costs, and we do that. We do that frequently, actually. I have cases we handle that we don't pay anything because we pay it up front and then we get reimbursed. But there's a lot of cases that isn't anything. This past year, we had some surprising cases. Payments from the government went to nursing home patients as well. So we had nursing home patients that had bank accounts that they never would have had in the past, and we were able to use some of that money to do cremations if they weren't claimed by anybody, any family members. So, but I can tell you, there's not hardly a day goes by. We handle, 7 to 12 phone calls on average a day, deaths. There's not a day goes by that there's not at least 2 or 3 of them that there's somebody says there's either no funds or there's no family to claim them. And so then we'll go seek out, try and find family first, try and find if there are any funds. Sometimes they have them, sometimes they don't. But I could keep one person busy full-time just doing that practically every day. It's a lengthy process. And I don't see the number in front of me, but like I said, I've got at least 4 in the morgue right now waiting to go that we haven't even paid for yet. That's why the numbers may not show the exact amount on there. We haven't paid that yet.
Go ahead, Ms. Furtado.
I just wanted to comment. I see that in the budget book, we have like 2 options. One are the 2 personnel, and the other is like a doomsday option, it looks like to me. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, I see that the budget is option 1, and I think let's just go with option 1 unless somebody's got some other feeling. And
So
take that
Dwayne and I
option
had a conversation about
2
this.
right out of there.
He can explain more, but the option 1 is what I put in the budget.
Right.
It's the option to maintain our services as
Yeah.
we provide them now.
Yeah.
Option 2 would be if we discontinue our autopsy services here and we ship it out to other counties,
Right.
and then we would close down the autopsy section of that department. Is that correct, Wayne?
That's correct. Yeah, that's the 2 options. We can't maintain the services we're providing now with the staffing that we have. I've never seen staffing turnover like this before. We lost 3 or 4 full-time investigators since April. I lost 2 part-time staff since the first of the year, and it's because there's too much work for not enough people.
Right. So as I was saying, the board unanimously voted to put those 2 into the budget this time, and I haven't heard anybody say, egads, we're not going to do it for 2022. So I think if that's it's sort of written like there's a decision point there, but I don't really think, unless somebody think it's something I'm not, but I think we just go with option 1.
Mr. McGuire?
I guess I have 2 questions about that. One, if the autopsies go out of the county, meaning where would they go to? Champagne's like a hub, right?
Right. We would go to another county that has a hub or wherever we could go to get them done, which would significantly increase our costs because right now, because we do them in-house, I don't have any transportation costs to send people to another county. I don't pay another county's fees to use their facility. Right. And I kind of control the fees that we have here. So it's a significant, we would basically just hire somebody to transport our cases to another county. We would pay them and we would be at the mercy of whatever their expenses are. And our nearest places are Kankakee, McLean County, Springfield. Those are the nearest facilities that could provide those services. They do similar to us. We service right now roughly 8 counties in our area. They service, somewhere around that in their counties as well. The trick would be getting somebody to take us as well because there's not enough pathologists to go around as well. So there's always the option where somebody can say, we've got too many cases already, we can't take you. They're under no obligation to take us. So,
well, that was the other issue. I thought we did quite a few counties. So every one of those counties might be going to McLean County.
Right.
And obviously the McLean County people will be ahead of the line of everybody else like us, and the families will be waiting longer and not get the service that's here. The second question about that is, budget 1 doesn't actually increase staff or the ability for you to do what are increased numbers of autopsies, and I mean you're staying a set number and barely getting along the way you are. So is budget 1 have enough staff to perform the duties that you need?
I believe budget 1 has factors in our 2 additional staff. The second option was the one that didn't have the staff. Budget 1 has it in there in the full-time salary line item. Yeah.
As long as you're comfortable with the number, because it's not going to get easier. It's going to get worse.
And I will say we will update that narrative before we put the budget on file, but went ahead and left it in there just so that you could see that language from Mr. Northrup.
Mr. Goss?
Yeah, just a quick question on the performance indicators. If I look at these numbers, can I assume that I can add up all these autopsies or deaths that we've investigated? Or are there some that fit in two categories? In other words, we have questionable deaths investigated, natural deaths investigated, deaths requiring autopsy.
Those are all separate categories.
But if I add them up, am I double counting?
No,
Okay.
no, you're not. It's,
Thank you.
and we, just for example, I can tell you in the last about 3 years, we've had, I termed it historical increases in our caseload, which was true. Our suicides, the highest number we ever had while I've been in the coroner's office was 31. We had, I believe, 32, 44, and I forget the other number. It was over 31, though, in the past 3 years. We're going to surpass that. Our record homicides for Champaign County in the past that we actually handled in the coroner's office averaged 8 to 12 a year. We had 17 last year, and we've already hit, we're right about 17 this year, 16 or 17. So those are just some examples. Our call out to scenes are way up. I think I put it in there, or I'd had it in last Thursday night's presentation. As of June 30th, we've been out 200 and almost 240 more times this year than we have been the prior year. And I'm estimating we'll be out way more than that, for the rest of this year. So it's an overall increase of everything, basically.
Okay, seeing no other questions for the coroner, thanks, Dwayne.
Thank
Wondering
you.
if the board would like to take a 5-minute break. We've been doing this an hour now. Does anybody want a break? You want to, okay, take a 5-minute break. We'll be back. Okay, guys, our 5 minutes is up. Yeah, we don't want to be here all night. All right, calling the meeting back to order. Okay, great. I think we are ready for the public defender at this point. Janie is here.
Okay, the public defender's budget is our next budget, and Janie Miller-Jones is here. Janie, could you stand? Thank you. One of the changes in this budget is a fee structure change that was implemented in this year. And the fees were historically, they're not in this slide, but I'll go ahead and read them off to you. For felony cases, $200, misdemeanor cases, $100, and traffic, $75. And those fees were subject to the CTAA waiver. The new fee structure is a flat $25 per case, and that will not be waived. A 2021 study on trial-level indigent defense services in Illinois concluded that the Public Defender's Office in Champaign County is understaffed, and 2 public defender positions have been added to the fiscal year 22 budget to attempt to move closer to complying with the National Advisory Commission on Criminal Justice Standards caseloads. There are some space needs that will be necessary for the addition of staff, and Facilities Director Dana Brenner has been in communication with County Executive Kloppel about those needs. I should have said that the other day. County Executive Kloppel has been in consultation with Facilities Director Brenner. The Public Defender's Office has an automation fund, and this is a fairly new fund where $2 per case is, sorry, you might want to see the slide, deposited in this fund. It's really very low revenue at this point. I know that Janie has been working with the Circuit Clerk's office to make sure that all of the revenue that is supposed to be going to this fund is collected and deposited. So they're working through that. This fund was established and will help offset and defray the cost of technology needs of the office, although at this level, we don't expect that that will happen anytime soon.
Can I ask a question about the Defender's Office, please?
Who's asking? I'm sorry. Oh,
Hi
go
there.
ahead, Jim.
Thank you. I'm glad that we're adding a couple FTEs. Obviously, making sure people are well defended is important. I was looking at the projected numbers, and as Dwayne talked about, the projection for 2021 is 1,500 open cases and 1,600, which is a pretty significant increase from 2020. Where are you at? Are you going to exceed that number for 2021, or? Okay.
I think we probably will exceed it, to be honest. Our numbers were a little lower in 2020 because of COVID, and there was a several-month period where there were a lot of folks who weren't arrested and given notice to appear, or the state's attorney filed charges a little bit later. But we've seen what I think to be a big increase in certain crimes, and so I think we're going to exceed that number. And I think next year, if the gun crimes keep going like they are, we'll have even more next year.
Okay, because that leads me to the budgeted number of 1,800, which is probably more like what 2021 might be. We'll do positions. Obviously, it's better to have more rather than less, but I don't know that it might not be 2,200 rather than 18. Is that enough people, new positions to work? I mean,
No, I mean, I gave an excerpt of this task force and what they came up with, and they said my 6 felony attorneys did the work of 12, and my 4 misdemeanor attorneys did the work of 9. So we're not going to get down with, I'd asked for 3 attorneys and a secretary. With even the addition of 3 attorneys, we won't get down to the numbers we should be at, but at least we'll be closer to those numbers. But realistically, we would need 5 or 6 more attorneys to even get anywhere close to the appropriate numbers. But we don't have any space for that many. But I'll take as many attorneys as you're willing to give me, to be honest.
Okay, thanks.
Moving on to the circuit court budgets, the presiding judge, Randy Rosenbaum, is here, and court administrator Lori Hansen. Some of the funding that was received in this fiscal year to upgrade the court audio-visual technology was paid out of this, deposited in and paid out of this fund. And another change that occurred in this fiscal year is the jury commission was moved from under the circuit clerk to the circuit court. And also the expenses that are jury-related expenses were transferred to the jury commission budget from this budget. There is an increase in professional services appropriation in fiscal year 2022, and that is due to the increasing need for psychiatric evaluations and interpreter services. I looked back at fiscal year 2017, and the 2017 actuals compared to what we are asking for 2022 budget is a 57% increase, and that is just due to the increasing need for those types of services. This is the jury commission department that I mentioned was moved from under the circuit clerk to the circuit court in fiscal year 2021, and also implemented in 2020 was a juror orientation available remotely, and the department plans to continue that remote option. Some of the expenses that are paid out of this fund include the questionnaire postcards and other jury expenses, in addition to the salaries for 3 part-time jury commissioners and the jury coordinator. Fewer 2-week jury trials have resulted in a decreased cost, and the decrease in the cost expected between fiscal year 21 and 22 is about $14,000. The Law Library Fund helps to support the Self-Help Center and additional legal services for self-represented litigants. And Ask a Lawyer Desk also resumed operations in fiscal year 2021. There was an Access to Justice Award funding for 2 grant projects, and those are not reflected in the budget for the law library because we just made those updates today. That information was not received in time for us to get that incorporated into the budget document itself. However, it has been added, and that was an addition of $15,000 in grant funding that is received in fiscal year 2021 and will be appropriated to be spent in fiscal year 2022. And that funding will be used for planning and design of an online dispute resolution program, self-help kiosks for that, and also to compensate independent consultants. So there will not be any additional FTEs hired.
Yeah, Mr. Storr.
Thank you. Going back to the law library and access for people trying to represent themselves pro se, that going back 1 slide, it was my understanding that there was going to be some help from the libraries, and I just kind of wondered if this is a kiosk that they have to go into the courthouse, or if they can access this legal self-help through their libraries or remotely.
You'll have to ask the expert.
These are two relatively small grants. They're planning grants. They're not execution or implementation grants. So with respect to the kiosks, we are going to explore whether they're workable, whether they can be installed in the courthouse, can they be installed within the community at, the transportation center in downtown Champaign or libraries or whatever. It's really a way for us to figure out, is it something that's feasible for us, will work for us, and if so, how much will it cost and where could we put them? So we haven't decided. It's a planning grant.
Thank you, Judge Rosenbaum. I was kind of curious about the kiosk being in the courthouse because there's so much you can't bring into the courthouse, and this might be something that would inhibit somebody from actually making effective use.
Moving on to the Specialty Courts Fund. The Administrative Office of Illinois Courts is going to be reimbursing the Specialty Courts Coordinator's salary again, and this was a position that was formerly funded with a transfer from public safety sales tax, so this mitigates the impact of this position on being attributed to that fund. The specialty court is an alternative to incarceration for individuals in the criminal justice system because of addictions, and the mental health court is also under consideration. And this fund also funds client needs, including medical, dental care, education, housing, and transportation, and it is also used for equipment and training. And I will say that the AOIC funding for this position covers a salary and not the fringes.
Mr. Patterson?
Tammy, it says that the AOIC is reimbursing from June of 2021 July 2021 to June 2022. Yeah, in the packet, it looks like it says retroactive to July 1, 2019.
Where did you see that? I'm sorry.
On the specialty courts, page 83, the first sentence of the second paragraph.
Yes, they begin funding this July 1st of 2019, and they will be funding it again for state fiscal year 2022.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Mr. Goss?
Yeah, sorry to pick on these KPIs, but if you go back to page 79, I'm sorry, I saw this and I was waiting for you to get done, but looks like we're going to send out 2,200 or 22,000 questionnaires and expect to have 5,000 or 15,000 of them unreturned. I assume that's a typo. And that's like 2/3 of them that don't get returned.
In budget 22, there are 22,000 questionnaires sent out, and then unreturned is 15,000, meaning 7,000 were returned. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, well, if you look like this year, we've sent out 20,000, and we're expecting 3,500 unreturned. So it looks like most are being returned so we can get jurors. The way it looks on the other one is like there's a number there that we ought to fix just so we get it out to the public the right way.
Now, let me ask. So we can double check that, but you're right. If it's the same, see here, you have 2,000, 3,500 that are unreturned, and here it's a higher one. Should it be this? We may have transposed it. Maybe it's the 7,000. We can double check.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to get it corrected so when we get it out to the public,
Thank you.
it's
We'll
corrected.
check that tomorrow.
This is great. You guys are really reading every page, every number. It's very good.
Okay, and the last budget under the circuit court is foreclosure mediation. And in fiscal year 2020, revenues were down in this fund because of the foreclosure moratoria that ended actually July 31st of 2021. This is actually a bank paid fee, and the court requested an approval from AOIC and was granted for this fee to be increased to $100 per case beginning in 2022. This fund it used to receive supplementary support through grants that ended a few years ago. And so it's really, the fee itself is not really sustainable to support this program. Although the increase in the fee will help sustain this a little bit longer, we don't anticipate that without additional funding that it will be able to continue to be operated other than maybe a couple of more years. Okay, we'll move on to the circuit clerk's budget, and circuit clerk Susan McGrath is here. The circuit clerk's operating budget expects there will be a loss of revenue from CTAA and bail bond reform with no replacement revenue. And some of that impact is reflected in the fiscal year 2022 projections, although the impact will continue to affect county revenues in fiscal year 2023. This office has been working to enhance the revenue through the amnesty event and expungement event grant funding. They received an $8,000 grant to put towards the expungement event in fiscal year 2022. For fiscal year 2022, we are expecting increased legal notices cost, and also there's an appropriation, a one-time appropriation for repairs to movable file storage units in the office. The office has been working on instituting cross-training for staff to help them be more proficient in different areas of expertise. The support enforcement budget under the circuit clerk receives revenue from an intergovernmental agreement with the Department of Health Care and Family Services. And at one time, this reimbursement covered the salary of a full-time deputy clerk, but was significantly cut in state fiscal year 2017. So for fiscal year 22, the funding for the position was moved to the circuit clerk's operating budget, and the time that that staff member spends working on support enforcement matters will be charged to this particular budget. We anticipate with a new ERP that we will actually be able to eliminate this department. This is a general fund department, again, under the purview of the circuit clerk, that we will be able to track revenues and expenditures through a project ledger rather than having to have a completely separate department. For the court automation fund, there's a couple of corrections here that were made that are not included in your budget binder, although this slide reflects those changes. One of those is the budgeted fund balance. At the end of fiscal year 2022, the budgeted fund balance is expected to be $113,800. What we needed to include in here that didn't get captured when we were preparing your budget binders was a JANO check writing fix of about $9,000. This fund is also expected to experience revenue loss because of the CTAA and bail bond reform with no replacement revenue. In fiscal year 2022, this particular fund is scheduled to purchase computers, monitors, and some other needs for the judges and staff. However, because of declining revenues, it's going to be very difficult for this fund to be able to absorb those costs, and for that reason, the clerk has requested through ARPA funding for those needs to be met. So that's something you'll hear about tomorrow night. This fund also pays for 85% of the JANO Justice System maintenance, and that's a pretty significant annual cost. I think the total maintenance cost for JANO annually is in the $180,000 range. The Child Support Service Fund receives revenue from a $36 fee that is assessed to the payers of child support. And revenue within this fund is insufficient to support the position that is budgeted. And so this position is unfunded in fiscal year 2022. Efforts to enhance revenue with better collection of an annual account fee are underway, and the office will be initiating a project to work with the state's attorney's office on child support collection efforts allowed by the statute. For the Circuit Clerk Operation and Administrative Fund, this fund, again, being impacted by reduced revenues, and in an effort to use what revenues are remaining, has decided to eliminate the financial manager position. Also funded in this fund is the benefits and salary of the court technology specialist. The department is installing a pay-it system for the collection of fees, fines, costs, and payments, which will provide uniformity across cases and improve customer service. And they also are implementing an inventory control system to reduce the cost of supplies and commodities. The e-citations fund is another fund that we have made some corrections that haven't been captured in your budget binder, however, are reflected on this slide. The budgeted fund balance at the end of fiscal year 2022 is $233,489. And there was a system, a migration to the AS400 data issue that didn't get any numbers into your budget books. So again, those corrections have been made. The actual revenue for fiscal year 2022 in the budget is $54,906, and expenditure is $50,000. And this fee is used to maintain an electronic citation program. The outside agencies had determined the program that they were going to use, but then later decided that it was not a solution that they were happy with. And so the circuit clerk's office is going to be working with those agencies to determine a suitable vendor to provide these services. The last budget under the circuit clerk is court document storage. Again, another fund that will be affected by the CTAA and bail bond reform. And the office has started to eliminate old paper files pursuant to the Supreme Court standards, which will also eliminate the expense of outside storage and allow better use of existing shelving. Again, I mentioned the general fund will be paying for a one-time cost of repair and configuration to storage cabinets that probably should go to this fund, but being court document storage, but being that the fund balance is very low, this fund just isn't able to handle that. Efforts to enhance revenue through budget cuts, such as elimination of a private website and also elimination of specialized case folders and individual desktop printers and scanners is underway. Again, the circuit clerk has another request of ARP funds for multifunctional printers that would help to initiate some of these savings that would in turn help this fund.
Mr. McGuire?
Yes. I followed through this as you were discussing the cuts to the different funds for the circuit clerk's office and the other offices. And I wondered overall how much they're losing as while at the same time their caseloads are increasing, both for the circuit clerk's office or the judges or our court system. And I have a concern about that and how we might rectify that.
We don't have a totally accurate estimate of what our revenue losses might be in fiscal year 2022. And that's because I don't think we're going to see the impact of what is going to happen as a result of the bail bond reform legislation until late this year or early in 2022. So we tried to be conservative in our estimate of revenue loss for fiscal year 2022 and say that we would have about a 10% loss of revenue for next year. I really won't know until, I think, early 2022, if that is accurate. But I wanted to let you all know that the legislation did not include replacement revenue. And the problem with an office like mine that relies primarily on fees and fines, that can have an impact even beyond what I'm estimating it might be. So I may be coming to you all in fiscal year 2022 and going, a little bit more than we thought it might be. And that could mean a more in-depth discussion of what we should be looking for in terms of revenue replacement.
Mr. Summers?
Susan, this is just a question with regard to maybe being able to move closer to electronically e-file on traffic cases. You note that local police departments have not determined what system they're going to use. Has there been any movement by the local police departments in terms of working with your office to try and come up with something so that might be a possibility?
Just as I took office in December of 2020, the city of Urbana had indicated that they were trying to come up with a workaround to replace the system that they thought wasn't viable. But after the initial meetings that we had on that in December and January, I haven't heard anything from the city of Urbana or any of the other police agencies about what they thought would be workable for the system that they did not like. And so I'm going to go ahead and make as much movement as I can with the agencies, because we cannot go to electronic filing with our traffic cases until we get this problem resolved.
Thank you.
Ms. Michaels?
Just real quick here, when you come into stationary office supplies, operational supplies, it looks like maybe we're just changing the terminology of what we're doing in the office. You had 25,000 for stationery and printing originally in 21, and now that's 0 and 16 in office, but it looked like then, now you're wanting to use operational supplies for 39,000. I don't see where it's going up, but is that kind of a trend that it's more operational than pinpointing stationary office and that type of thing?
I think you're right about that. What we've tried to do as much as possible is to eliminate the need for outside printing, and the specialized file folders. What I'm referring to there is for the folks who saw this in the tour, we were using legal size folders for a lot of the paper files, which makes no sense because nobody's used legal size paper for filing in 25 years. And the traffic folders, as you remember, were those little tiny folders, which also cost a lot of money. And so we're going to be saving somewhere between $15,000 to $20,000 in using uniform file folders for the paper files that we still have to maintain until we can get to full electronic filing. But you're right, there are also other expensive things that we have to do that had not been included in prior years. And so while we've been able to do some things like eliminating the desktop printers and hopefully at some point eliminating the desktop scanners so that not everybody has one, we also have to look at what the cost is going to be for replacing with the multi-scanner printers that Tammy referred to, and also a couple of other things that we hope will eliminate costs. So we're paying more, for example, with shredding than has happened previously, but that's because we're trying to eliminate some of the paper files we don't need anymore to be more effectively able to use the space that we have in the office for maintaining those files. One thing, again, we don't know for fiscal year 22 is that there is going to be a new record storage automation policy that goes into effect on January 1st. And so what we don't have yet is we don't know what the new approved fee schedule is going to be, which I'll have to bring back to you all once I know that. But we also don't know what the expense is going to be of the new filing codes that they're going to make us require now. So everything changes, it looks like, about every 3 years. We're going to have more new file types as a result of this new Record Storage Act. And so I tried to build in a little bit for that because I don't know exactly how that's going to work either, except I'm going to have to memorize a lot of new codes now.
Ms. Furtado?
And just, you might have told me this in the past, on when you eliminated the position of financial manager, who did those duties go to?
Those went to my chief deputy and
Deputy, okay.
myself, so we're splitting those.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Susan.
Moving on to the state's attorney's budget. State's Attorney Julia Reitz is here tonight. For the operating budget, other than the wage increases that are appropriated, there are no significant budget changes in fiscal year 2022.
Mr. McGuire?
Same kind of questions for the state's attorney's office. Obviously, they've been handling more cases. Trying to find the number of cases because it looked like the number stayed static. What other resources does the state's attorney need to accomplish that additional work? Maybe I started too early, but I guess I'm looking at page 111, and it talks about felony case for victim contact. Maybe that's not it. Oh, felony cases filed 2019, 1851. Projected 2021, 1650, which seems low to me, and I'm not sure that. And then the number goes to 18, it remains at 1850 for felony cases from the 2019 to 2022. Same thing happens with misdemeanor cases. I think we've seen more cases, haven't we?
Am I supposed to press this? Okay. Well, so during the COVID shutdown, we had less cases. You know, these numbers are just made up. You want me to project something that's going to happen this year, next year, or the year after that? We just make this up. I mean, honestly, I can't tell you what's going to happen in 2022 as far as crime goes. So, you know, it's a made-up number. I can tell you that this year we're dealing with significantly more gun violence. We're dealing with law enforcement, lack of resources, their personnel shortages. It's making it difficult for, you know, them to do what they need to do, and, you know, we are responsive to what they bring to us. At the same time, we're seeing a significant increase, of course, in the use of video evidence. Everybody's got a body camera, which is great. Everybody's got squad car video. Everybody's got, all the departments have interview rooms that have cameras. Everybody's got a Ring doorbell. Every store has security camera. There's a lot of technology out there that's happening. We are struggling to keep up with that, so we are looking at various digital evidence storage options that we're hoping to be able to move forward on. I don't really honestly know where that is in the budget.
It's in the capital budget.
So, okay, it's in the capital budget. I rely very much on Tammy for those sorts of things, but we are looking at digital evidence storage. That should help my office. That should help the public defender's office, although it's in, I guess, my budget. I don't know how, again, how that works, but, so that's probably a big thing. But, I mean, as far as the number of cases, we deal with what comes to us. I, like the public defender, would love it if you gave me 3, 4, 5 more attorneys, but I'm not asking you for it because we're doing the job.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure, that you do have the resources. I think for years, our public safety, judges, courts, and the sheriff's office have dealt with lean budgets, mostly because of the nursing home. I mean, we drug out a lot of different money away from what are our greatest responsibilities in this county, both treating people that go to court appropriately and those that are in the jail. And I want to make sure that the resources are returned to these most important departments. And some of it seems to be happening, but hopefully we see that. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. I think if there's concern about that the resources need to go to the sheriff's office and the jail issues and the patrol deputies issues and the correctional staff issues. I am not asking you for anything other than evidence management. Anyway, what I said, I'm really not asking you for anything. I'm sure my staff will not appreciate that I said that, but.
Okay, the next budget under the state's attorney is support enforcement. And the revenue from this budget comes from a contract with the Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services. And this is 2022 is year 2 of a 5-year contract. And there are annual increases in that, which is something that the county hasn't seen for quite some time. It's just been stagnant revenues and sometimes doesn't quite even cover all of the expenses. There is a $25,000 appropriation in this budget for facility and office rental that we don't historically use. There's also a $25,000 revenue in the facility budget that's basically a wash for this. But a few years ago, the Department of Healthcare and Family Services said that they wanted us to be able to record in our accounting system if there was any kind of in-kind rent that was billed to this program, so we ended up putting this in just as a safeguard in the event that we needed to produce that documentation. For the drug asset forfeiture fund, the state's attorney's office receives 12.5% of the value of forfeited funds, and in fiscal year 20 and 21, there were more significant forfeited funds than we normally see. In fiscal year 2022, the planned purchases for this fund are for equipment and training for the staff responsible for drug possession and delivery cases. The appropriation that you see here of $104,000 is greater than expected, but allows for flexibility for the office to meet needs if they so desire. The state's attorney's automation fund is the last budget under the state's attorney, and this is a fee imposed on convicted defendants, and there are statutory restrictions on the use of this fund.
Ms. Furtado?
Back to the drug asset forfeitures, do we receive that upon conviction?
No, it's a civil matter. It's separate from criminal cases. And just to clarify why I said I'm really not asking you for anything, I have this fund available to me that other departments don't have. And in the past 2 years, we have had really 2 major asset forfeitures that have been very helpful. We had one, a semi-truck that was loaded with thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in cash that was traveling through our community that was taken, and shockingly nobody claimed ownership of it. And so that resulted in a significant asset forfeiture, both from the cash and the sale of the semi-truck. And then this year, we have had a successful asset forfeiture of a Lamborghini, which is going to go up for auction if anybody wants to bid on it. And that was out of a gun and drug case that is currently pending. But the forfeiture part of that case has been completed. And so now that vehicle is going to be up for auction, and we're expecting it to go for a significant amount. So those funds I can use to pay for training, to pay for equipment. I'm using those funds to help our local police departments pay for computer software that is used to basically get into phones for phone searches. And so we basically made the expenditure larger so that I had flexibility to use those funds.
Okay, we will move on to the sheriff's budget, and Sheriff Dustin Harmon is here. The first budget under his purview is a law enforcement budget, and due to the criminal justice reform legislation, there are increased mandates for deputy training, also operational oversight and reporting in fiscal year 2022 that will increase the need for resources. An increase in personnel leaving the department on military leave and medical issues has resulted in increased overtime and a variety of other impacts on the budget. For fiscal year 2022, there are 2 additional deputies that are funded in the budget, and this will, however, require formal action by the county board after the budget is approved through, I said resolution here, but I can't remember if it was a resolution or an ordinance. So there will be an additional step that will be required by the county board to authorize the addition of the 2 deputies. For fiscal year 2022, there is a continued investment in the social worker program, although the budget amendment that was funded for ARP to the mental health board included funding from January to June of fiscal year 2022, so there is only a July through December appropriation in the budget for that program. For the correctional center, there are new contracts for both food services and medical mental health care for inmates that will take effect in 2022. Those contracts have not yet been negotiated, but there are some nominal increases that are expected and appropriated. The increased cost of COVID-19 mitigation in the jails will continue. It is expected in fiscal year 2022. And also within the correctional center, I know you're aware that there are some retention issues. This is attributed to staff on military and medical leave and other reasons, and this has also caused the increase in overtime and other expenditures. And per Dustin Harmon, the unexpected closure of the downtown jail would increase cost exponentially, and as you saw with the recent budget amendment that we approved, that is most assuredly true.
Can I go back to the deputies?
Yeah, Mr. McGuire.
Okay. Back to road deputies, an increase of 2, which I appreciate. I think you came to us 3 or 4 years ago. You've only been here for 3 years, so. And asked for 2 road deputies then. Obviously, the situation, as I've been discussing tonight, is different. Is that enough? How will that help? I'm very concerned about both that and corrections, maintaining staff even though we have sign-up bonuses. But the staff and deputies and COs have been working for a long time under the conditions that they are now, and they're not seeing an increase in pay or the same type of. I'm afraid we're going to lose more people. How do you see that working? How do you see the closure working and those costs? And is it properly addressed in these budget?
So 2 additional deputies will get us back to 2008 numbers. In 2008, the sheriff laid off 2 deputies or got rid of 2 positions in order to help with the county's financial budget. And so these 2 more deputies don't take into account necessarily any kind of growth the county might have seen. It just takes into account getting us back up to 56 deputies, which includes me and my administrative staff, to serve the county of 1,000 square miles. And so I can always use more staff, just like Janie and just like the state's attorney. But, you know, I initially asked for a couple of more, and I compromised with 2 because I think 2 is a lot better than getting none. You know, it did not help this last year with a lot of the local police departments short with staff as well, because we all pick up the slack together. And so, you know, we have had an absorbent amount of overtime on different things. The other thing a lot of people don't understand is we have had probably, this year, we've probably had 5 deputies out between military leave, which we cannot deny, workers' comp issues, off-duty work issues, things like that. And so those all count in my numbers, but it drastically reduces the number of deputies I actually have out there working. As far as corrections, as you know, I initially thought I was going to ask for a couple more correctional officers, but I'm just trying to get the staff back up to what I currently have. I think that will work. You know, at one time, those of you who've taken a tour of the jail recently know that there's one correctional officer that will go in with maybe, you know, 80 inmates and do their checks every 20 minutes. Ideally, and it used to be that there were 2 correctional officers supervising that. I think that is something, I don't think that's necessarily a path we need to go down right now with the jail in flux, but I do believe that there will be plenty of work for the current staffing levels to do when we consolidate into one facility. And so personnel is all, I mean, we're bare bones. We're always working with bare bones staff, but 2 will definitely help in the patrol division.
What are actually the industry standards for both road deputies and correctional officers in the jail? What numbers would those look like compared to what you have currently?
I've been told that we need at least a 15% buffer, so whenever things like this happen, I haven't necessarily looked at the jail, what the National Institute of Corrections would say ratio-wise, but I do believe a study would say, and I never would expect this number, but I do believe that a number would, that a study that they have done before would say that we need between 70 and 75 deputies based on the population that we serve in Champaign County. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I'm surely not expecting that. I mean, I don't need that many deputies. But I need more staff.
Yeah, I'd like to see the extra, rather than 2, 4 at least in the budget. Thank you.
The Merit Commission is the next budget under the sheriff, and this budget is used for recruitment and testing of employees. And it is difficult to predict the employment needs for the future, and so the increased personnel needs will also require increased expenditures. The Drug Forfeiture Fund is another fund. It's difficult to predict the number of cases that will be handled related to asset forfeitures, and therefore it is difficult to predict the revenues. The revenues and expenditures are both regulated by statute. The Cannabis Regulation Fund is a recently created fund, and again, revenues and expenditures are regulated by statute. This is a per capita distribution, which is based on the unincorporated area's population, and 8% of the Cannabis Regulation Fund revenues that the state receives are distributed to local governments. And these funds will be spent on training and equipment for investigations and enforcement related to the illegal cannabis market. The Jail Commissary Fund, again, revenues and expenditures are regulated by statute, and expenditures are appropriated to help improve the inmate welfare in the jail.
Actually, I have a question about these next two, because these two funds are probably the ones that would be the most impacted based on the decision around the downtown jail. And so are we right now, are we just budgeting it out? It looks to me like we're budgeting it out as like full commissary. Like, how often does this contract come up? Can we reduce the services if we, you know what I'm saying? Like, how, it seems as if there would be some decrease in this, right? If there was, if we are going to be moving people. I know we're just moving them for this year, but if we decide to continue to keep them. But are you budgeting right now as if we're bringing everybody back?
Yeah, so we started this process before the decision was
Right,
made
right.
to house out of county.
Right.
And so we've budgeted the maximum amount over the last couple of years because we need to build an egress area, a fenced-in egress area at the jail. But there's no sense in doing that if we're going to have to tear it down whenever we consolidate facilities. So we've kind of been putting that off. And so we would rather budget because this fund is restricted funds and it has to go towards inmate welfare, we would rather budget on the high end and not use it, which will be the case in fiscal year 21, than budget less and then have to come back and change that.
Okay, so we might see both a revenue and expenditure reduction in this depending on.
We
what
could,
decide.
absolutely.
And I guess I would carry that over to medical costs, or are you anticipating the medical costs to remain, or is it the same answer?
I can let Tammy talk to that, but that's more of court fees with medical costs, and it's a pass-through fund. And so the inmates that are housed out of county will still come here for court, and so those fees will still be assessed, even though they're being housed out of the county.
And I'm not even sure if I covered this fund, but as Sheriff stated, the revenues from court fines and expenditures are also regulated by state, and essentially this gets passed through the general fund to pay for a very insignificant portion of the medical costs.
Ms. Michaels?
This is rather small, but this is one of the few that has a finance charge bank fee here as an expenditure, and I just don't see why it would do that with the amount of monies that we keep with others. You know, I know it's not a large amount, but yet I'm just surprised to see that as a line item.
I'm sorry, Ms. Michaels, I didn't hear what you said.
The finance charges and bank fees. This is probably one of the few accounts that I've actually seen that line item on, or maybe I just missed it.
Is it jail medical costs?
No, it's commissary, which was
Oh,
kind of odd.
commissary.
Not that big a deal, it's just unusual. You can get back on that. It's just a small amount.
We do have some of these in some of the other budgets. I don't know, I'm not really sure why this particular one is generating this number, but we can look at that. The Emergency Management Agency is the last budget under the sheriff. And the revenue in this department comes from the Homeland Security and DOT hazardous materials and training planning grants. And this budget includes appropriation for anticipated expenditures, which is mostly personnel. However, not any unexpected disaster response expenditures or appropriation, sorry. Are there other questions of the sheriff? Okay, we will move on to planning and zoning, and zoning administrator John Hall is here. And I also saw Susan Monty here, who oversees a solid waste management fund that was moved under the planning and zoning department a couple of years ago now, I think. Per Mr. Hall, the backlog of open nuisance complaints should continue to be reduced in fiscal year 2022. Fiscal year 2022 permits are expected to increase to the 5-year average with revenues of $217,000. And this is going to include a one-time solar permit fee for the solar farm that the county board has been discussing over the last couple of years in rural Sydney, and that fee is expected to be about $174,000. In fiscal year 2022, the budget includes the addition of a zoning officer, and fiscal year 2021 is projected to have 42 new zoning cases, which is the second highest number that the county has seen in 11 years. For the Solid Waste Management Fund, the revenue to expenditure deficit in this fund represents the county's contribution to collection events. The county has been spending down the fund balance of this fund over several years, and another revenue source is going to need to be identified in order for the county to be able to contribute its portion of the fees in order to continue allowing for the unincorporated area to participate in electronics collections and the IEPA one-day household hazardous waste collection event. In fiscal year 2021, costs were higher, and there was also a need for there to be, well, I guess I shouldn't say it like that. There were fewer volunteers that were available to help with these events, and also the contributions from municipalities was decreased to support the community collection events.
Mr. McGuire?
So do you see a source to fund this? I mean, it's hard for people to get rid of televisions, and sometimes they end up along the road in the rural areas. So
It's very likely that the county's contribution towards this will have to come from the general fund, just like the municipalities and villages fund their portion.
Mr. Storr?
Kind of to that point, is the only source of revenue that we might be able to use from the general fund, or are there any permits that we might be?
There are waste hauler fees that are collected, and we did increase those fees last year. Is that correct? Last year, but it still is not a significant enough revenue source to support what the county's contribution would need to be towards the events. Okay, we will move on to information technology, and our CIO, MC Neal, is here tonight. If you want to stand. A lot of moving parts for our IT department in this fiscal year and next fiscal year. We are planning the replacement of our end-of-life phone system, and this will increase functionality, allowing calls to be made and received through programs and applications for staff to be able to take and receive calls from anywhere. There are also major upgrades to our network planned. The fiber optic infrastructure that connects our buildings will be upgraded to support faster speeds, and networking equipment will accommodate improved bandwidth. Also, IET is currently in the process of procuring a network appliance that functions as a network intrusion detection device, and also implementing cybersecurity awareness training for staff. And that doesn't even touch what all they're doing, but just a few things.
For those
Ms. Furtado?
For those expenses, are we at all looking to see if any of them could be offloaded onto ARPA?
We did have a discussion about that, and felt as though the phone system and the network upgrades would not be a very good candidate, although the request that the IT department has made through ARP is for upgrades to the IT, the video system, presentation system in this room.
Mr. Goss?
Yeah, a quick question. Do we carry any kind of cyber security insurance for hacks and those kinds of things?
I am not sure. Not that I am aware of, but.
I believe that we do.
We do.
Through ICRMT.
Yeah, we do have some. I don't know what the limit is.
I was just curious because I'm responsible in my office for that, so it's top of the mind for me. Thanks.
Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Mr. Neal, how many operations are still being operated from the AS400? I know that we're trying to migrate stuff off of there.
So right now, quite a bit as we're migrating off to the ERP, but right now all of our financial information is still on there. RPC has some programs that are running off of it, animal control. Although coroner's office isn't actively using it, there's some systems that they still access for historical records and things of that nature. So we have quite a while to go, but we're slowly but surely migrating things off and onto newer platforms.
JNO is also on the AS400.
Thanks, MC.
Okay, we'll move on to the physical plant budget. Director Dana Brenner was here. I believe he's in the building. For fiscal year 22, rent revenue increases due to contractual increases per those contracts. There's also a transfer. The largest expense in this budget is a transfer to the Capital Asset Replacement Fund, and that includes funding per the facilities plan, which in fiscal year 2022 is $1.95 million, in addition to another couple of $100,000 for planned video surveillance system at Brookins. The county's debt certificate is also budgeted in this department, and there are 3 years left of payments for that debt service certificate, including fiscal year 2022, before that will be paid off. Moving to administrative services, the largest non-personnel expense in administrative services budget is for countywide postage and mail sort services. And postage costs are budgeted to increase next year due to the notification requirements from Senate Bill 825, which is a permanent vote by mail list. So the clerk's office is also requesting some additional postage costs through ARP, and you can hear more about that tomorrow night.
Can we let Dana go?
Oh, Dana's here. Did anyone have questions for Dana?
Ms. Michaels?
Just real quick on the postage, that's still offset by charging the departments for what they use, correct? You're just increasing your amount because that's what you need to offset with the other departments.
That's in the administrative services budget, the postage costs.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we don't charge general fund departments. We do charge outside funds, highway, mental health board, animal control. I think Mr. Storr had a question of Dana.
Yes, sir. Where do we stand on demolition of the old nursing home?
That's in next year's capital asset plan. So not this year. We've got some things to do over there. The old boiler house, we're in the process of discontinuing that mechanical situation there. It's got to be drained. We've got to remove some plumbing, some electric, reroute it around the building because it feeds through the old boiler head hatch and into 3 of our other garages that are occupied, EMA, Sheriff's Office, and then Elias. So that's in the works and will be done this fall. Our intention is to shut down and then board up. We'd like to be able to actually pull down a 30-foot section of the old building because once we turn the water off in the old building, the fire suppression system will not no longer work in that portion of the building. It will in the 73 building where Elias is renting space. But we'd like to tear down and give ourselves a little fire break, if you will, just for precautionary until we're able to tear it down next year.
Thanks, Dana.
The county board budget is the next budget. There is one position in this budget that is budgeted but not vacant, and that is the county administrator position. Also in this budget is a county board chair and board and committee per diems. We have continued to use the budget for the county administrator over the last couple of years for things such as project management for the ERP. I know the county board has used some of that appropriation for legal services. And so at this point, that historical wage of $130,000 is budgeted in personnel. And we await the direction of the board to determine how it would like to use that funding. We will continue to have some project management cost in fiscal year 2022 for implementation of the ERP. We estimate those costs to be about $37,000. We also may want to use some of this funding or recommend that some of this funding be used to engage the services of a municipal advisor to assist the county with potential financial modeling as the board determines how it's going to move forward with the jail consolidation issues.
Ms. Furtado.
So maybe as a pass forward, what we could do, Mr. Goss, if you want to talk to your caucus and I could talk to mine, and I mean, basically what we just need to break it down to is what do we want in professional services and what do we want to leave it personnel, and get back to Tammy and to Darlene with that dollar amount. Seem like a good plan? Okay.
The general county budget is broken up into 2 slides. This first slide is focusing on general county revenues, and this is where the general funds levy is deposited. This is the largest fund or department, sorry, within the general fund, again, where property taxes and state shared revenues are deposited. The property tax levy in fiscal year 2020 is an increase of 3.6% overall. However, the general fund levy itself will reflect a decrease because of the former nursing home operating levy reallocation, which was in the general fund this year in order to mitigate the $1 million loan on the balance sheet and also go towards some of the obligations owed to the general fund, is recommended in fiscal year 2022 to be reallocated to the liability levy. The property tax levy increase of 3.6% is prepared based on inflationary growth of 1.4% and also new EAV added to the tax rolls of $99 million. In regards to sales tax revenues, which are deposited in this fund for the quarter cent, the 1 cent, and cannabis, they're reflecting very strong growth due to the level the playing field legislation. And I will say that in 2021, the county lost one of its top 10 taxpayers, which I know every year I talk about the impact of that is pretty significant because those top 10 taxpayers make up about 60% of the total 1 cent revenues. And so there was actually a retroactive application, which I believe the Illinois Department of Revenue only lets there be 6 months of retroactivity, but it was about an $81,000 garnishment that is going to be applied to the 1 cent sales tax revenues over a 9-month period. Even with that, the increase in level playing field legislation revenues has caused this revenue stream to grow. And so one of the things that is not captured in your budget binder that will be updated is an adjustment to income tax. And as you know, the 2020 census was recently completed, although the certified numbers have not been provided, and the Illinois Department of Revenue will not give us what numbers they're going to be using for the unincorporated area until they receive the certified numbers from the Census Bureau. And when I spoke to them a few days ago, they said it would likely take up to 2 months for us to receive those numbers. So for the interim, what I will probably be doing is taking the total census and subtracting the incorporated numbers to get to the unincorporated number. And what that looks like right now is about a 2,222 population decline for the unincorporated areas. So I will be adjusting the income tax numbers down based on that preliminary estimate. We also may have some slight adjustments to sales tax numbers as we receive the September numbers. I may be adjusting those based on what those look like. For general county expenditures, this is where the county appropriates for its general corporate fund, health and life insurance. And as we talked about during the budget process memorandum provided by Executive Kluppel, we have prepared that budget based on 94.5% of the current census, plus the new positions that we have indicated are added to the budget. So what we have seen is that we are often underspending this appropriation, and that's due to turnover. When we hire new employees, they have a 2-month waiting period before they're eligible for health insurance. So that's why we have recommended that we not put full appropriation for employee health and life insurance, and that we budget at a little bit lower level to capture that appropriation in other areas that are needed. The 22 budget includes $200,000 for a comprehensive workforce study. Executive Kluppel talked about that a couple of months ago. And the budget also includes a transfer to the Capital Asset Replacement Fund. And for fiscal year 2022, it includes current and reserve funding. And it also includes a $3.75 million transfer. There is going to be a significant fund balance by the end of this year that is generated in part from revenue to expenditure surplus in fiscal year 2020, and an additional surplus we expect to see in fiscal year 2021. And so the recommendation is that we transfer some of that surplus over to the Capital Asset Replacement Fund to be reserved as the county board begins discussions about how it's going to move forward with its jail consolidation planning or not, or reserve funding towards a potential replacement of the justice case management system. So right now, this $3.75 million is budgeted in the county board's capital department in professional services. And as we determine how that could best be used, it could be moved to the appropriate department within capital and line. And the last budget for the night is the tornado siren budget. This is a general fund budget that is a pass-through budget, basically with revenue and expenditure for reimbursement and appropriation of the subscription costs for the tornado sirens. And those sirens are not owned by Champaign County, but they are owned by the University of Illinois, the cities, and some of the villages. And that's the end of the presentation.
That's the end of the budget presentation for tonight. Mr. Storr.
Thank you. Why do we have a 2-month delay for people to get health insurance after they've been hired?
That's not uncommon, and that's part of the county's policies. I think at one time it was a 3-month delay, and it is a 2-month delay now. I can't tell you the history of that.
Unless somebody has other questions, Mr. Patterson?
I just want to thank Tammy and the rest of the administrative staff for putting in this hard work. I know it's very complicated, and now we have like the ARPA stuff. I know it's going to be very difficult, and I just want to say I really appreciate the effort.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow.
Okay. The meeting's adjourned.